I was reading Belonging by Topeka Turner for last month's Soul Matters theme on the topic of belonging. I'm a very slow reader these days. When I came across her thoughts on sacrifice, she writes, "There is always a sacrifice to be made in the way of belonging. The word sacrifice is not really about self-denial as we've been taught, but comes from the root to make sacred. Sacrifice is a show of trust in the unknown. It is the pruning that redirects your energy toward the life of becoming, like quitting a job only to have an opportunity appear that same afternoon, or breaking up a bad relationship only to meet your true love. There is magic in sacrifice. Life is calling you toward it, and your severance of the tethers that bind you to outgrown forms is the answering of that call. Your willingness to step into the emptiness from which all life springs is a show of devotion to your own belonging." She's right that sacred and sacrifice do share their origins in the Latin word sacrare, to concentrate, to consecrate, hold sacred, immortalize, set apart, dedicate. I knew this somewhere in the back of my head that the two words were related, but sacrifice is not something we talk a lot about as Unitarian Universalists, or as Americans, actually, for that matter. In fact, sacrifice has some pretty negative connotations. For many Unitarian Universalists, sacrifice gets bound up in discomfort or rejection of traditional Christianity and the idea that God demanded Jesus sacrifice his life for the redemption of human sin. What kind of God is that? Unitarian Universalists also hold tight to our freedom of conscience and reason and the search for truth. And we don't like sacrificing them to adhere to ancient creeds and beliefs that do not make sense to our lived spiritual and religious experiences. And just for fun, I looked up sacrifice in the topical indices of our hymnals, and guess what? Not there. Yeah, I know. As Americans, we also don't lend much credence to the concept of sacrifice as much as we talk about it. Quite the opposite. Our consumer culture teaches us that we should never have to sacrifice, never compromise on anything in service of our own comfort or desire. We deserve the best, whatever is being sold to us: cars, shampoo, soda, toys, smartphones, because that will bring us happiness and meaning and connection with the bright, happy people we see selling us the stuff. As Americans, we shouldn't have to sacrifice anything that encroaches on our freedom, our right to own whatever guns we want, or to say whatever angry, hateful thing we want to say, or even to invade the Capitol when we disagree with the election results. Unless, of course, we happen to be, female, or LGBTQIA+, or an indigenous person, or a person of color, or an immigrant fleeing a country. Then, of course, our freedom is impinging upon the freedom of real Americans. And when we do speak of sacrifice, it's centered on American military service persons. Sometimes that is sincere, like reading names on a wall or a memorial stone at services to honor them. But more often, I experience it as lip service, paid at football games or in TV car ads. The rise in Christian nationalism is disturbing on many fronts, including really bad theology around this notion that belief in Jesus Christ as one's personal Savior means that the sacrifice has already been made for you, and you don't actually have to follow anything the man said in his own lifetime. This is what the ancient biblical prophet Micah was condemning in his own time, when he told the Israelites that God was not interested in their ritual sacrifices at the altar. They were hollow acts because they were just going through the motions to assuage the community's failure to live into their faith, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with their God, with their source of being. Robin Wall Kimmerer, a botanist and a member of the Potawatomi Nation, received the MacArthur Genius Grant this past week for her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, which several of us at First Parish read together during a pandemic book group. It is a beautiful weaving together, as she writes, of indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the teaching of plants. She describes how indigenous peoples understand that human survival and community depend upon a mutually beneficial and harmonious relationship with the rest of creation. In one chapter, she describes the practice of the honorable harvest, general guidelines, if you will, among indigenous communities for how to live upon the earth. She writes, "They are not written down or even consistently spoken of as a whole, but if you were to list them, they might look something like this. Know the ways of the ones who take care of you, so you may take care of them. Introduce yourself. Be accountable as the one coming asking for life. Ask permission before taking. Abide by the answer. Never take the first, never take the last. Take only what you need, take only what is given. Never take more than half. Leave some for others. Harvest in a way that minimizes harm. Use it respectfully. Never waste what you have taken. Share. Give thanks for what you have been given. Give a gift in reciprocity for what you have taken. Sustain the ones who sustain you, and the earth will last forever." Woven throughout these practices is sacrifice, awareness that we human beings belong to the earth and all life on it, and that if we are to take from the life of others on the planet, be it animal or plant life, we need to do so with gratitude and care, understanding the sacred nature of what we are taking, and give something sacred of ourselves back. As she writes, "The taking of another life to support your own is far more significant when you recognize the beings who are harvested as persons, non-human persons, vested with awareness, intelligence, spirit, and who have families waiting for them at home. Killing a who demands something different than killing an it. Unlike the state laws, the honorable harvest is not an enforced legal policy, but it is an agreement nonetheless among people, and most especially between consumers and providers. The providers have the upper hand. The deer, the sturgeon, the berries, and the leeks say, if you follow these rules, we will continue to give you our lives so that you may live." Braiding Sweetgrass became a surprise bestseller during the pandemic because, I think, it resonated with many people's growing awareness of the fragility of the environment and human contributions to climate disruption. If nothing else, the pandemic revealed not only how we human beings around the globe are interconnected, but how nature can, whether as a tiny virus or a giant natural disaster disrupt and destroy our lives, our communities, our habitats, especially if we do not learn how to live sustainably and harmoniously within them. And to do so will require sacrifice. Not sacrifice in the sense of denial, of doing without, like giving up plastic bags, gas-guzzling cars, chocolate for Lent, or one's own sense of superiority and privilege, although I think it would help an awful lot. But sacrifice as a commitment to living within. Living within a deeper awareness of sacred relationship, living within the interdependence of all life, to which we each and all belong. Sacrifice in this context is not about creating hardship or suffering for ourselves or others who are forced to sacrifice their well-being, even their lives, against their will for the comfort of the rest of us. Rather, sacrifice is about practicing gratitude, living sustainably, not just within our individual means, but within the means of all humanity, all life. So on the one hand, sacrifice is an intimate and daily practice as we make our way through each day with intention and awareness about how our actions and decisions give and take from the larger communities to which we belong. Sacrifice also means living with intention and awareness of our ancestors and the generations to come. When I shared the idea of talking about sacrifice as a path of courage in staff meeting, Ken noted that sacrifice means taking the risk that there is a future worth trusting in, which I thought was a beautiful way of thinking of it. And the poem I shared by Rob Jacques describes this with its haunting imagery. We are here. We saw sorrow. Across our hearts, emptiness and cold pulled hard as they do in you now. And we pressed on as you will do. We did all that possibility would allow and expect nothing less of you. We stand guard over accomplishment and a strong journey through all this. As you may remember, I'm participating in a mentoring program for spiritual writing this year through the Collegeville Institute in Minnesota. And much of my writing is centered around my family stories, about how my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother, as a Jewish family, survived World War II in Poland, and how my grandfather did not. As I write about these stories and reflect on them, I become increasingly aware of the role of sacrifice. My grandparents both made the heartbreaking choice, the sacrifice, not once, but a couple of times, to separate themselves from their only child, my mother, because they believed it offered her the best chance for survival. That I am here is in part a result of those sacrifices. Many parents had to make those sacrifices then, and many parents are making those hard sacrifices now. And now, as then, there is no guarantee that comes out of that they or their loved ones will survive, that there will be another generation. The young people of our country and our world are sharing their anxiety and their concern and their anger about the state of the climate and the environment, and the older generation's slowness or downright refusal to change our ways. They are asking us to do all that possibility will allow, to be good ancestors now, to show that we believe the well-being of their generation and the generations to come belong to us as much as to them and their lives. There is always a sacrifice to be made in the way of belonging. To return to Tokapa Turner, our Universalist ancestors did not believe that Jesus' crucifixion was a sacrifice demanded by God for the redemption of human sin. Rather, they believed it was a result of human failure to recognize God's unconditional love for all people, that all people are beloved, and that we belong to one another as well as God. While those who have been pushed to the margins and told that they did not belong, really embraced these teachings from Jesus, and they felt seen and heard and healed in his presence, those in power felt threatened. And so Jesus had to die for that reason. It's not much different today, tragically. And while we as Unitarian Universalists of more recent generations have transcended beyond specific Universalist Christian theology, it's echoed in our first and last principles, affirming and promoting the inherent worth and dignity of all persons and the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. This is joyful and hopeful news for all souls, that we are beloved, that we belong to each other, that we belong to the earth, that we belong to the spirit of life and love. At the same time, that belonging, like everything involving love, asks something of us. It holds us accountable beyond our own comfort or desires, not just in the here and now, but for those who come after us. Perhaps it is time to bring the word sacrifice back into our Unitarian Universalist vocabulary and our faith.